Well, the central area is workers' control of production, community control, popular control of communities. Should communities be run by the community council, town hall, something like that, or by the rich people and the real estate developers, the bankers, and so on?
In the budget that was released yesterday, Canada announced billions more for military aid to Ukraine, but it also made a very strong gesture of placing its faith in the private sector to get us out of the climate crisis. But in recent interviews, you've talked about the American government's willingness to risk nuclear war by escalating in Ukraine in similar terms, I think, to the sort of lack of meaningful action on climate change. And the common thread seems to me to be that elites are driving us toward global disaster. So I guess my question is, what do you think accounts for this collective inability to step away from the edge of the cliff, as it were? Is there some kind of death drive among global elites?
It's very simple. A word that we're not allowed to think about. It's called capitalism. Suppose you're the CEO of ExxonMobil or JP Morgan Chase, which is funding fossil fuels. You know perfectly well that you're destroying the life of your grandchildren. It's not a secret. They understand that perfectly well. And you ask them, why are you doing it? They have a pretty good answer. They say, look, if I don't do it, I'll be kicked out because those are the rules of the game. Rules of the game are you maximize profit or you're kicked out. So if I don't do it, I'll be kicked out. I'll be replaced by some other guy who's not as nice a guy as I am. I at least care about these things a little bit, so maybe I can slightly mitigate it. That next guy who's coming on is just going to make it worse. So for the benefit of my grandchildren who I'm killing, I'll continue to produce fossil fuels. Notice that's a logical argument. There's no flaw in it. It's a rational argument. And it goes back to the insanity of the institutions. If you have a society run by institutions which are driven by the need, just by the rules of the game, it's called the rules-based order, driven by the rules to maximize profit, whatever the consequences, it's a suicide pact.
What do you see as the pathways that people can take to actually make tangible gains that will last a longer amount of time in the face of these institutions? Because the context being like, sure, we can make little reforms here and there, but they seem to be rolled back. So what do you see as the pathway to making lasting gains?
Well, remember that there are many varieties of capitalism, like the period of the 50s and the 60s. It's quite different from the period of the 80s until today. That was what was called regimented capitalism. No financial institutions were under control. The Treasury Department controlled them. No financial speculation, no crises, no crashes, some degree of social services and so on. What was followed, the so-called neoliberal period, basically Reagan and Thatcher up to the present, is a particular version of savage capitalism. Class war, unrestrained. It's quite different. It's had an enormous toll. Well, let's talk about the time span for overcoming capitalist autocracy. It is much too long for the immediate crisis. But eliminating the savage part of savage capitalism, that's feasible. I mean, it's not utopian to say we could go back to a system like Eisenhower. Say, it's not exactly utopian. So yes, we could defang the savagery of the class war of the past 40 years and go back to a more controlled and regimented capitalist order, in which case lots of options would open. But still, plenty wrong with it. In my view, it should be eliminated, but at least it offers opportunities to carry out the measures, which are pretty well known. I'm sure you've looked at the latest IPCC report. Usually IPCC reports are pretty conservative. These are consensus documents. Everybody has to agree. That means they understate. They hit a lower common denominator. Not this time. This time they pulled out the stops. No more time for mincing words. It's now or we're destroyed.
So even to sort of blunt the cutting edge or savagery, as you put it, of the capitalist system as it exists today, what do you see as the most effective or most promising actions that people have taken, either collectively or individually?
Several levels. On the one hand, it's critically important to move to put an end to the fossil fuel system. And for Canada, there's a special case, the mining catastrophe. Canadian mining is a scourge all over much of the earth. It's causing enormous catastrophes. Well, Canada can rein that in. That's one category of activities. There's a lot under that. The second is to reverse the move of the state capitalist systems like Canada towards a more savage form. It is very concrete. Take the Canadian Health Service. It wasn't the greatest in the world, but it was moderately decent. Now it's being moved towards the worst system in the world, the one right to the south of your border. That's the worst health system in the world. Double the costs of comparable countries, some of the worst outcomes, because it's privatized.
So on that theme of utopianism, or maybe differing responses to the crises of capitalism, it seems that we've seen a resurgence of interest in communism and even Stalinism or Maoism, certainly among young people. I think a lot of people are sort of losing faith in the traditional modes of trying to advance little electoral gains here or there, or protesting. And part of that seems to come from the idea that the only way to hold the line against capitalism for more than a short time is to create a centralized party that exerts a high degree of control. This view seems to be getting, certainly not widespread acceptance, but becoming increasingly popular. My question for you is, do you think that principles of autonomy, democracy, and freedom come with a price in terms of the longevity of whatever project we're talking about?
It's the other way around. It's the lack of autonomy and freedom that are bringing about these problems. The elements of what's called the left among younger people who are kind of neo-Stalinist, it just illustrates the complete collapse of the left in the West. Any authentic left would be well aware, as people like Rosa Luxemburg were over a century ago, that the Leninist, later Maoist reaction is strong attack on socialism. These countries are farther from socialism than the United States was. Labor working people had more rights in the United States than they had in the Soviet Union.
But wouldn't the counter to that be that the US only allowed those rights because the Soviet Union was a threat of a good example, to use a phrase that you've pulled out of the US archives at one point?
A little bit of history is useful. The rights were basically won in the 1930s by militant labor struggle, popular activism, and so on. They weren't worried about the Soviet Union. Soviet Union was not considered a threat.
You don't think they were worried about communist revolutions in Europe and so on?
In Europe, the rise of fascism was motivated in part by the fear of a worker revolution. I mean, they called it communism, but it didn't come from Russia. It came from German workers, French workers. The Russians were mostly opposed to it. And take a look at Spain, where there was a revolution, 1936, a real revolution, the Spanish anarchist revolution. Who crushed it? Stalin. The Russian Communist Party was in the lead in crushing the revolution. They don't want workers' revolutions. This is a brutal, harsh, state capitalist autocracy. It has nothing to do with socialism or communism. The parties, the activist groups sometimes labored under illusions about Russian socialism, but they were illusions all the way through.
I'm curious, you've certainly spoken about anarcho-syndicalism quite a bit in the past, and I'm curious how those ideas in today's context, how you see those ideas having a purchase or relevance in terms of how social movements should consider how they organize themselves, or labor movements and so on.
Well, let's take the labor movement. You could go back into this First World War, let's say, a century ago. The labor movement in the West was aiming for worker control over industry. In Italy, workers were taking over the industrial system, running it for themselves. In England, the Guild Socialist movement is pretty close to anarchism. I mean, it was workers should take over industry, run it by themselves. The United States, the major labor movement, been suppressed by the Knights of Labor. Its main slogan was that those who work in the mills should own them. We don't want to be the slaves of bosses. We'll run it ourselves. Radical farmers movement, the so-called or the authentic populist movement. Texas, Kansas, it was an agrarian society mostly. Yeah. They wanted to free themselves from the control of northeastern bankers, market managers, run affairs for themselves, set up a cooperative commonwealth linked to the labor movement, crushed by force. A lot of them went to Canada, became part of the background for the radical movements in Canada. But this is not that long ago. It can be reconstructed.
So I want to bring it back to this idea of the cooperative commonwealth. I get the sense that you've had in your life a lot of different experiences with cooperative structures. I'm just curious to hear your reflections on those attempts at creating genuine micro examples of socialism.
Canada has pretty broad, it's kind of limited in its depth, but a pretty broadly functioning cooperative movements in commerce, retail, and so on. Those are the basis for cooperative movements. They can expand the production. If you look at the old Rust Belt in the United States, it looks devastated, but a lot of places, small worker-owned enterprises are beginning to crop up. They're being organized. There's quite a lot of them, in fact, integrating into the more service-oriented economy. Well, that's actually there's an organized movements behind that. The New America Project or something like that. Goral Perovitz's group doing very good work. It's difficult, of course. Class war, it's not easy. And there's plenty of forces on the other side. If you allow them to win the war without confrontation, okay, they win. If the mass of the population becomes organized and active, they can win gains.
So in the context of the theme of utopia, you've said a few times that we don't understand human cognition and interaction well enough to know what a cooperative society and economy would really look like. And you say it will require a lot of experimentation. So what areas strike you as the biggest unknowns here?
All sorts of things. We don't know. Take some of the concrete proposals, very concrete proposals. Probably the most detailed ones, at least that I know of, are those of what's called PARACON, participatory economics. Michael Albert, Robert Hanel worked out very detailed programs. We don't know whether these can in fact function, whether people will accept them. Will people be willing to participate in these? Only one way to find out: experimentation. Turns out that worker-managed production is extremely efficient. One of the major industries in Europe, in Spain, Mondragon, huge industrial conglomerate, production, banks, housing, it's worker-owned, actually worker-managed. Of course, it exists within a broader capitalist society. So there's all kind of cutting corners necessarily. But sometimes these worker-owned enterprises are so successful that big capital moves in to try to buy them up. They offer the workers who own it pretty munificent pay if they just sell out their ownership shares so the big corporations can take it over. Then you guys can live in luxury for the rest of your lives. That's pretty tempting.
I have some family friends who were part of a worker co-op and they retired and they took a deal like that and they got paid very well. But I think they sort of saw what happened to the company after they sold it and they realized the mistake they had made.
Well, that's a question of how much class solidarity you can build up.
Along a similar lines, if you were a researcher of humanity's future, blue sky, what would you say would be the questions that you would find the most interesting to pursue or explore when it comes to how we can figure out what a cooperative society would look like and what kinds of experiments we would have to do to figure out what that looks like?
Well, the central area is workers' control of production, community control, popular control of communities. Should communities be run by the community council, town hall, something like that, or by the rich people and the real estate developers, the bankers, and so on? Well, those are concrete questions all the time. They're very concrete. Should we have a mass transit system, for example? It's a very concrete problem. These things come up all the time. Very real. I mean, take 2008. It's very interesting what happened then. Huge financial housing crisis. Part of it was that in the United States, the Obama administration pretty much nationalized the auto industry. They just took it over. Well, there were a couple of possibilities. One possibility was bail out the owners and managers, pay them off, return it to the same class of people, have them continue to produce SUVs and pickup trucks to cause traffic jams and destroy the environment. That was one possibility. Another possibility is hand it over to the workforce in the community, have them work on what we really need, like efficient mass transportation. That was a possibility too. If there had been a left, a real left, not fantasizing about Stalin, but a real activist left, they would have built up a popular movement to bring this to public attention, first of all. Wasn't even discussed. Turn it into an issue, then move to implement it. At the same time, move to cut back the fossil fuel use. Fact of the matter is that the government could actually buy the fossil fuel industry at market rates, and it wouldn't be much different from what the Treasury Department pours out to rescue investors who lost out during the pandemic. It's the same order of magnitude. Buy it out and turn it to sustainable energy. There are other things you can do, are being done, in fact. Work with the mine workers and the oil workers. It's being done. Take West Virginia, coal state, very reactionary. Now the activist work, my friend and colleague, Robert Pollin, economist, co-author, he and his group at the University of Massachusetts have been working with mine workers in West Virginia and Ohio and California. And they've actually gotten the United Mine Workers to accept a transition program, close down the coal mines, put the miners to work, capping the mines and developing sustainable energy, better jobs, better community. The mine owners aren't going to take that. They're not going to accept it. In fact, their own legislator, Joe Manchin, right-wing Democrat, happens to be a big coal baron himself. He votes strongly against it. But you're getting the working people to begin in the mines and the fossil fuel industry to recognize that for a better life for them and their communities, they have to move in this direction. It's not impossible. Organizing is possible. In Canada, this is a major issue because of its huge mining and exploitative industries.